Well, this morning we're continuing on our journey down Route 66, and we actually are heading across state lines after a lengthy stay there, going through the state of Missouri and into the third leg of our trip, which will be the state of Kansas. And each of these legs, again, if you're relatively new, actually we're using them because there are 8 states that Route 66 goes through, and there are 8 major sections of the Bible. So we're taking each one of these states as sort of a way to get into a new leg of, a new section of the Scripture. And Kansas, which, by the way, only has 13.2 miles of Route 66 in it. We're going to make 5 stops in those 13 miles, so we'll get a really good look at this little stretch. But the correlating section of the Bible is what's called Old Testament poetry. There are 5 books of Old Testament poetry, so we'll be making 5 stops in Kansas, and we'll be looking at those 5 books of Old Testament poetry. You can see Route 66, it just barely cuts a little corner here of Kansas, and if we blow that up a little bit and you kind of look down there in that lower right hand corner, and then it blows up, and this is sort of what that little corner looks like. One thing that's kind of interesting about Kansas is that a lot of Route 66 got covered over by Interstate 44 when it was built. And the only state that Interstate 44 bypassed during that construction was Kansas, so that all of the Route 66, the road that is in Kansas, it's all original. So you really get a real good little feel for Route 66, even though it is not very long. And of course, Kansas, home state of Dave Meserve. I actually spent my elementary school years out in the middle of Kansas, a little town called Russell, Kansas, home of Bob Dole, for those of you that are as old as I am. I have kind of a fun story, but I don't have time to tell it this morning. It would be life-changing, but I really don't have time. Anyway. And then I spent my latter years actually in Kansas City, but on the better side, which was the Missouri side, Dave. So I'm actually going back to my high school this week for a big fundraiser, so I'm going back to Kansas City. But anyway, our first little stop as we get into Kansas is a little town called Galena. And Galena, it's an interesting little place. There isn't much there. It really, what it's most known for now is that there is a little filling station there in Galena, Kansas, and a number of years ago, 4 ladies bought it, and they actually turned it into a little gift shop and kind of a soda fountain, and it was called 4 Women on the Route. And then in 2006, Disney released a movie called Cars, and the story is that as John Lasseter and the Pixar team, they actually traveled Route 66 looking for little things that they could put into the film. And when they got to Galena, sitting next to this filling station was an old tow truck. And that old tow truck then became the model for the truck in the film. Mater is his name, and then Tow Mater. And so Galena, Kansas was the home of Tow Mater. And they now, because of copyright laws, cannot call that truck Tow Mater, so they now call it Tow Tater. And so that's the truck there. But also some people think that Radiator Springs, which is a little town in Cars, was based on Galena. There's a different opinion on that. But our next movie night, I'll announce it now, our next movie night, we're going to do Cars. And we think that'll be fun. It'll be a great kind of family film. Plus, it's got all kind of Route 66 stuff in it. So anyway, our corresponding book that we're going to look at this morning, the first of the book of poetry, poetic books, is the book of Job, and it's an amazing, amazing book. And again, it's contained in what we call poetry versus simply historical narrative, and we'll look at the reason why. It was part in the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible was divided into 3 parts: the law, the prophets, and what were called the writings. And Job was a part of what were called the writings in Hebrew. It's a very important book, and I know many of you are quite familiar with it. It's an important book because it deals with a question that probably all of us have asked at some point in time. It's interesting to me that some scholars, it's a mysterious book, by the way. We don't really know who wrote it. There are parts of it we don't really know. We don't know when it was written. And so the range of thought on the book is that some scholars believe it was actually the earliest book of any book written in the Bible, and they place it, prior to even the time of Moses writing the Pentateuch. Others place it much later, even into what we've just been through, what would be called post-exilic times. But I think, I sort of lean a little bit, sort of a combination of those things, because I think that the story itself, the real story that the poetic version is based on, appears to be set around the time of Abraham. It has a lot of elements of that. And I think that how appropriate would it be that perhaps the earliest book written in all of the Bible deals with this question, what C.S. Lewis called the problem of pain. And many people struggle with this issue. Many believers struggle with it at times. Certainly, there are people that don't believe in God because they don't know how to answer this question. And the problem of pain, as Lewis defined it, is simply this: if God is all loving and all powerful, why is there so much suffering and pain in the world? And that is the subject that this marvelous piece of the Old Testament deals with. It's really set up, when you look at it, again, it's an epic poem like the Iliad or the Odyssey or Paradise Lost, and it's almost set up as if it was a screenplay for a stage play. There are three very definable, what I will call acts, to the story, and we'll use that just to kind of give us a structure to go through the book this morning. And the first act, I'm simply going to call Job's suffering. It's found in the first 2 chapters of the book, and it sets the stage for what is to come. We read this, and here's our Job for the day, okay? There was a man in the land of Uz, which is the proper pronunciation of that. I've gone years calling it Uz, and discovered this week that actually in Hebrew it's Uz, whose name was Job. And actually his name was Eob, because there is no J in Hebrew. These are like if you played biblical trivia games. You want this information. Anyway, and that man was blameless, upright, fearing God, and turning away from evil. 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. His possessions were also 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and very many servants. And that man was the greatest of all the men of the East. Now, we're introduced to this guy by the name of Job. Again, we're told that he's from this land, and again, there's all kinds of debate about this, but it would appear that the land of Uz was a geographical region. We know it was to the east of the Jordan River, and when he's referred to as the greatest man of the East, again, back even at the time of Abraham, this would have, identified the fact that he wasn't living in the Promised Land itself, but he was east of the Jordan River, and that's probably maybe Edom. Some people think the land of Gilead, but somewhere over on the east bank of the Jordan is where Job lived. We're also told about him that he was righteous and blameless, upright, a man that feared God and turned away from evil. And then the third thing we're told, obviously, is that he was wealthy, the greatest man of the East. I was thinking about this, by the way. This was in the period of time pre-money. And, there was something really very healthy about the way that life worked in those days, because, if you were Bill Gates, you could not have had 54 billion camels. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you were sort of somewhat limited by the fact that wealth was gauged by, things like cows and sheep and so on. And Job had all of these possessions, and so he was a very wealthy man. Now, at this point in the book, we are told something that Job never knows. Okay, so if you can sort of imagine, put yourself in Job's place with what's getting ready to happen. His life is about to be turned upside down, but he doesn't know what's going on behind the scenes in the unseen realm of reality, and that becomes like the backstory to what the book is all about. So we're told this. Now, there was a day when the sons of God, and that, by the way, is an expression dealing in this particular context with the angelic host. There was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, I'm going to go back. I'm not ready for that yet. So, you have this scenario of what's going on in the unseen realm, and there in this realm, God and the adversary, which is what Satan, the name, means, they have this encounter, this confrontation, and God says to him, have you considered my servant Job? In other words, here's a guy that is, he's living a righteous kind of a life. He's resisting evil. He's pleasing God in the way that he's living. And Satan's response to that was, well, does the Lord fear Job for nothing? In other words, well, of course he's going to follow you. He's got everything going for himself. He's got this great family, he's wealthy, he's this great man. Why wouldn't he serve you? And what happens is it sets up a test that God allows to happen. And what's happening in Job, by the way, in sort of a simplistic form, I believe, is that there's this attempt to communicate something that's really a very complex reality. In the New Testament, again, when Paul makes a statement that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and the unseen forces of evil in the heavenly realms, that there is always this, this dynamic going on that we are not usually conscious of in the unseen realm that's impacting what is happening in the seen realm. And certainly that's what's going on here in Job. And it's communicated in somewhat of a simplistic kind of a way here. But what happens is that God gives the accuser, Satan, and by the way, the word means both one who attacks and one who accuses. Interesting, because again, if this is one of the earliest written books, you're getting a picture here that really doesn't get fully developed till quite a bit later on. But he's given permission to afflict Job. And so we read this. The Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your power. Only don't put forth your hand on him." And so Satan departed from the presence of the Lord. And of course, as you read the text, what happens is Satan attacks. And what he does is that he attacks Job's possessions, first of all, and everything that he owns, he loses. He loses everything. Again, from the perspective of his flocks and his crops and everything that constituted his wealth. And then in what had to be an amazingly crushing blow, his sons and daughters are all gathered together, and the place where they are, that the roof caves in, and all of his children are killed. So he's lost everything that he possesses, and he's lost his whole family. I mean, it is a devastating experience for Job. And in a sense, I do believe that this is based upon an actual incident. Job was a real person. But in a sense, as the writer, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, is dealing with this subject, you almost get this feeling that he's asking the question, what's the worst that could happen to a man or a woman? What's the greatest kind of devastation? And certainly Job experiences this, and he loses everything. And his response to that is amazing. Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, and he fell to the ground and worshiped. And then this classic text. He says, naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I shall return. The Lord giveth, the old King James, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And so he passes this first test. And then what happens is we flash back again to this heavenly scene. And there in the heavenly scene, again, the accuser, the attacker, God kind of points out, look how Job responded to this. And so Satan kind of throws out a second challenge, and it basically says, well, that's great, but let me afflict him physically and see what happens. I think I have the text. Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin. Yes, all that a man has he'll give for his life. However, put forth your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. And of course, as you read the text, you realize God allows even this to happen. And so we read, then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and smote Job with boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And Job took a potsherd and to scrape himself while he was sitting among the ashes. So do you get this image here? I mean, think about this. Here is this man who, in a sense, faithfully living in relationship with God, seeking to serve Him, seeking to be obedient and righteous, the greatest man of the East, and suddenly you look at him now, he has lost everything. He's covered in boils from head to foot, and he's sitting on an ash heap, which basically was the garbage dump. It was where you burned the garbage, and he's sitting there, and he's got a piece of pottery, and he's literally scraping the boils all over him. And in what is sort of a gross statement, the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, says he's scraping the pus away from his boils. I mean, it's quite an image. You compare Job where he was, and then you look at where he is. And really, most of us will never go through what Job went through. We will go through difficult times in our life. Some people really do almost go through this kind of devastation, but it is just, it's this incredible image that we see in our mind of what's happened to Job. And the very first piece of advice he gets comes from his wife, and she just says, okay, Job, curse God and die. Really, this is what wives are for, guys. Here's the quick solution: curse God and die. Well, anyway, and let me say this: that if this was being performed as a play, at that moment the curtain would fall and Act 1 would be finished. And so we're set up now to see what's about to happen as this question of why would God allow something like this to happen begins to unfold. The second act, which is the bulk of the text in the book, actually covers chapters 3 through 37, has to do with Job's friends. And when his friends come, and what we're going to look at now, there's a sense in which the question, again, that's being asked, well, why has this happened? By the way, just structurally, chapters 1 and 2, and then the last chapters 40, I think, through 42, are both prose. And then when you hit chapter 3 and these interactions between Job and his friends, the text shifts into a poetic structure. So we're introduced, first of all, to his first three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. What I like to think of as just three guys from the planet Remulac. All right, no. I was trying to find good images for the three guys, and I thought, well, if we used big stars, we could go with these guys for Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Then I thought, no, you really have to find sort of some guys that really, are more from the eastern side of the Jordan River. And I found these three guys, but, they looked like they were trying out for The Voice. And then the guy on the right, I think, is doing one of those got milk commercials. So anyway, we'll come up with some better figures than this. But three friends come along. And so Job, this whole section begins with Job simply making an observation, a lament. And basically, we're told after this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. And he said, let the day perish on which I was to be born, and the night which said a boy is conceived. You read the text, and again, he's starting to ask the question, why? Why has this happened to me? I'm one of the good guys, in a sense, and then he's in such pain that he simply says, I just wish I had never been born. Now, we're getting ready to get into these interactions, and let me just go back and note something. An assumption is going to exist here, and we're going to see it over and over again. And it's an assumption that perhaps is as old as time itself. And even with the book of Job, you get to the time even of Jesus, and even by the time of Jesus, even in the Jewish community, there still is this faulty assumption, and I think it runs all the way through modern times. And the faulty assumption is simply this: good things happen to good people, and bad things happen to bad people. And can I just say, that is bad theology. And really, as you study the scriptures, the message of the Bible, even when you ask the why question, is this: that we live in a fallen world. And in a fallen world, life is hard, and it's not fair, and we're all going to die. I mean, that's good theology, unfortunately, right? But there's an assumption that goes on now behind the scenes, and you're going to see it again. 3 cycles of interactions now that take place between Job and his friends. And I'm going to take you through a highly condensed version of at least the first cycle, and then hit a few highlights of the next 2. But the first person that speaks then is his friend Eliphaz. And Eliphaz sort of sets the tone for what's to come. And he says this to Job: remember now, whoever perished being innocent, or where were the upright destroyed? Now, do you know what he's saying here? Good things happen to good people, and bad things happen to bad people. In other words, you have done something wrong, Job. And as you read through the lengthy speech that Eliphaz gives there, he's saying something, you've done something wrong, and you need to confess. Job's response, teach me, and I'll be silent, and show me how I've erred. In other words, Job is saying, I'm innocent. And as you read, by the way, in this particular little passage, you also get a sense that Job is starting already to say, with friends like you, who needs enemies? Because they're going to constantly come back and keep accusing Job. You've done something, okay? We see that then with the second of his friends that begins to address him. Chapter 8, Bildad. And Bildad says this: how long will you say these things? He's responding to Job saying, I'm innocent. How long will you say these things? And how long will the words of your mouth be a mighty wind? You're just blowing smoke, Job, okay? Does God pervert justice? Or does the Almighty pervert what is right? And I think there's one more text. Yeah. If your son sinned against him, then he delivered them into the power of their transgression. So not only did you do something wrong that's resulted in what's happened here, but the reason your kids are all dead is they did something wrong. And so again, this same kind of a mindset. God is punishing you. You've done something wrong. And Job responds. And again, his response is, I'm innocent. He bruises me with the tempest and multiplies my wounds without cause. And then he goes on, and really you begin to see something, even this early in the book, that I think is very important to what it's trying to teach us, is he goes on and he says this: He, that is God, He destroys the guiltless and the wicked. And if the scourge kills suddenly, He mocks the despair of the innocent. The earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covers the faces of its judges. And if it's not He, then who is it? In other words, Job is saying this. It seems to me that what you're saying, that God blesses the good guys and punishes the bad guys, does not really jive with reality. In fact, what it looks like to me in reality is that God doesn't always bless the righteous, and He doesn't always punish the wicked. As a matter of fact, sometimes it seems like He does just the opposite. This is scandalous talk, by the way, at this particular point in history, for Job to even suggest such a thing. But it's real and it's honest and it's true. I mean, we look at the world in which we live, and frankly, we know that sometimes bad things happen to good people, sometimes bad things happen to God's people, and a lot of times, at least until Jesus comes again, because for us, that's always, what we have to look forward to. But it seems like what? That the wicked prosper. And the Scripture has quite a bit of, information that would back up what Job says here anyway. And then, of course, he adds to that a second time. And by the way, why have you brought me out of the womb? Would that I have died and no eye had seen me. In other words, again, I just wish I could die. So Job, I mean, he's really, in a tough place. Well, then comes Zophar, the third of his quote friends. And Zophar, I mean, first of all, the poetry is phenomenal in Job. Some scholars would say it's at the level of Shakespeare. I mean, it is, if you read Job, which you should, the poetry is great. The message is simple, and it just keeps repeating over and over and over again. And so here's Zophar again. For you have said, my teaching is pure, I'm innocent in your eyes, but would that God might speak and open His lips against you. And so again, you've done something wrong, and he'll go on here and say, you better confess. If iniquity is in your hand, put it far away, and do not let wickedness dwell in your tents. You've done something wrong, you better confess, and you better repent. And Job responds, and this is sort of the end of this first cycle, and he sort of gets a little bit in his buddies' faces here. Truly then, you are the people, and with you all wisdom will die. It's kind of like, oh yeah, you guys know everything, and boy, with you all wisdom will die. So, and then he responds, and this is beautiful, and his response is simply this: though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Kind of one of the classic texts. You ought to jot that down in your notes there out of the book of Job. So the whole first cycle sets the stage, and again, because we don't have time to go obviously through all of the cycles, understand this, that what you'll see as you read the book is that cycle is now going to repeat itself 2 more times. In other words, there's going to be 2 more times where each of the 3 friends are going to respond to him, and there will be, and Job, every time one of them kind of does his little spiel, Job will speak back to them. Let me just hit a couple of little highlights out of these. This is chapters 15 through 25 of the book. Again, this repetition of these cycles highlights. One of the first guys this time to speak is Zophar. And Zophar makes this statement: the godless man perishes forever like his refuse, and those who have seen him will say, where is he? And let me sort of translate here. He's sort of saying to Job, and I think maybe King James might even use this word in it, but he basically says, you're going to perish like your own dung. That's what he's saying to him. He's sort of saying you're full of crap. I mean, that's really what he's saying to Job about what Job is responding here. And you're getting what you deserve. You're getting what you deserve. Is this getting boring yet? I mean, it's monotonous. It's just over and over and over again. And then Eliphaz comes along, and Eliphaz says this to him: is not your wickedness great and your iniquities without end. And in the context of this particular cycle, what he's basically saying to Job is, how dare you even question us? And how dare you question God? And furthermore, and there's innuendos then that Eliphaz throws out of what Job has done that's unrighteous, okay? And so, how dare you question us? We know about you. And then finally, Bildad, he comes along and says this to Job, how then can a man be righteous before God? How much less man who is but a maggot, a human being who is only a worm? And so, again, the message to him, you are evil, you've done something, and you are a maggot and a worm. So how in the world can you, assume that you are righteous in any way? And then sort of the classic response in these cycles that again are sort of classic texts out of Job. Job simply responds this, as for me, I know my Redeemer lives. And at the last, he will take his stand on the earth. And even after my skin is destroyed, yet in my flesh I shall see God. It's an amazing statement, by the way, again, if this is as early as we think it might be, because he's really, and when you ask the question, well, how can he be righteous? Well, there's sort of really, I think the sense in the text is more that he's living an upright kind of a life. But in terms of righteousness, as we understand it, in terms of being in the right relationship with God, from the very beginning, righteousness was a gift given on the basis of faith. And for us, it's when we look back at what Jesus Christ has accomplished on our behalf, and we say yes to that and put our faith in that, then we're told that we are declared to be righteous. I mean, that's at the heart of what it means to come to faith in Jesus Christ. And so we're looking back, but in the Old Testament, oftentimes the question is asked, well, how could those guys have been considered righteous? And the reality was that they were oftentimes considered to be righteous because they looked forward to the coming of the Messiah and what he would do, and they believed it. And again, Abraham believed God and it was reckoned to him as righteousness, the scriptures say. And so here, think about this. Here is Job. He's not even a Jew, by the way. He's probably an Edomite as best as we know. But he has this sense, somewhere along the line, he's been taught or he's been told, that a day is coming when the Redeemer will come. And he has faith in this. I know my Redeemer lives. And he's going to take his stand. He's going to show up. He's going to come. And even if I die and my body, it deteriorates, one day in the flesh I will see God. And it's a tremendous kind of statement, even in the midst of this difficulty, as to his faith in the coming of Messiah, the coming of Jesus, really. Okay, and then what happens next at the end of sort of these cycles is that we have sort of a closing discourse by Job, and then the finale kind of this Act 2 here is that there's a fourth guy in the mix, and apparently it's like he's been sort of standing over to the side. We really aren't told he's even a friend like the other three, but he has 5 chapters, and his name is Elihu. This is the other statement by Job, which is so classic. He knows the way I take. In other words, again, God knows that, I'm not guilty of everything you're saying about me. And when he has tried me, I shall come forth as gold. That's another great, great statement about, sometimes, God uses these, difficult times in our life and his heart in a, when Paul makes a statement in Romans that, that God can cause all things to work together for good. Part of that has to do with the fact that oftentimes when things happen in our life of great difficulty, God uses that to really kind of purify our lives and to purge out of them, the dross that's there. And it's like our lives to him are like, silver that's been refined in the fire or gold refined in the fire. And that's what Job says, that when he has tried me, I shall come forth as gold. Well, then comes along number 4. 4. I'll blow through this pretty quick here. And what we know about Elihu is simply this. He's a younger man, okay? And we know this because he says that. Now, Elihu had waited to speak to Job because the other guys, they were years older than he. And he says, I am young in years and you are old. Therefore, I was shy and afraid to tell you what I think. And then, obviously, he's no longer afraid to tell them because he tells them. And what he basically tells them is, again, the same thing. He's mad at Job. He's mad at Job for justifying himself, and he's mad at the other three guys because they haven't been able to build a conclusive case demonstrating that obviously Job has done something wrong. And in the text, he basically hints that, again, Job is getting exactly what he deserves. And again, if we were watching this on a stage, the curtain comes down again, and it's the end of Act 2. And I think the takeaway, it's pretty simple in a lot of ways at this point in the story of Job, and it is simply the truth that sometimes good people do suffer, and sometimes bad people thrive. That is the reality of the world in which we live. Well, Act 3 is the most important part of the whole book, and it really begins in chapter 38, and Act 3 has to do with the fact that at this point, in the story now, having gone through all of this accusation and, attempts to defend himself and, again, over and over again, what seems to be the same argument, God shows up. And we're told that right out of the bat in chapter 38, the very first verse, then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. Now, if you've never read the book of Job before, or if you were Job and his buddies at this particular point in time, God shows up. What do you expect he's going to do? Well, obviously, he's going to give you the answer. Why do good people suffer? And why do bad people sometimes thrive? And we're hoping that God is going to explain how all this works out and why even his people suffer. Now, can I give you a little spoiler? That's not going to happen. It's probably, for some people, perhaps one of the frustrating things about the book of Job, because you think you're going to get an answer here. Well, it's not exactly what happens. And again, if you were if this was being staged, you can almost imagine that now the four accusers, friends, sort of drift off, perhaps into the side of the stage here. And we simply hear God because he speaks, and there's two different times where we're told that he speaks. The first time we're told that he speaks out of the storm, okay? And the second time he speaks out of the whirlwind. So you don't really see a God character, but you hear him. And I think what God does here is God gives an explanation for the problem of pain, all right? He starts out in verse 2 and he says this to Job, "Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge?" Let me translate that. Who in the heck do you think you are? That's kind of what God is saying here, okay? And then he says this, "Gird up your loins like a man, and I will ask you, and you will instruct me." Paraphrase, put on your big boy pants, all right? Just get ready here, okay? And get ready, and I'm going to ask the questions now, and you're going to answer me. And what happens is the very first question, it's classic, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. In other words, hey, how about explain the creation of the universe to me? Well, here's what's going to happen. The essence of this is that God is going to ask questions that have to do with how can a human being fathom the ways of God? And when you read these chapters, it's amazing. There are 71 questions that God asks. He asks question after question after question, and the first 53 questions all have to do with His creative power. And And the answer to every one of the questions is either, I don't know. I mean, he doesn't even give Job time to answer them, by the way. But the implicit answer, I don't know. I couldn't answer that question if my life depended on it. Or when he asks questions like, could you do this? The answer is no. And so he just question after question after question about how can you even begin to fathom my ways. And Job begins to get the picture. There's a brief little response. God again, will the fault finder contend with the Almighty? Let him who reproves God answer it. And Job comes back and says, behold, I'm insignificant. What can I reply to you? I lay my hand on my mouth. And then God comes back and he asks 18 more questions. And they're all about his justice and his power. And again, the answers are, I don't know. I can't answer that. Or no, I can't. I don't have that ability. So what God is saying, and again, this probably is a little disappointing in some ways, but I think it's important. What he's saying is this: sometimes his ways really are beyond our ability to comprehend. And sometimes things don't make sense to us in sort of our finite, rational minds. And I think if I get what's trying to be said here, part of what strikes me is this. And even if God attempted to explain and answer the question why, I don't know if we would even have the ability to understand it. And further, if we had the ability or the capacity to understand the answer, we probably wouldn't have to ask the question. That isn't very satisfying, is it? I'm sorry. But I really think that's the message here. And really what comes out of this is there are times, and I think this is hard, very hard, there are times where we either trust, and like Job, we simply say, I don't know. Or I think there are times we don't trust and we lose faith and confidence in God. And I think there are a lot of people in the world that's where they are. They just can't put those pieces together. And then sometimes we don't trust and we lose faith for a season, and over time our faith gets restored. C.S. Lewis, when most of you probably know the story, but he watched his wife die from cancer. He was married quite late in life, thought she went into remission. She ended up dying, and he really had a hard time with it. And he made the statement, her name was Joy. He said, when Joy died, I became an atheist for 3 months. But slowly, over time, God kind of brought him back and brought him to the point where he would say, I don't understand, but I think I can trust you. And I think when we look at the cross, you look at the cross when you don't understand and you say, I don't understand, but if you will do that for me, I'll trust you. I'll trust you. It's hard stuff, I know. And yet, it's exactly what Jesus said. In this world, what? You're going to have tribulation. But take heart, I've overcome the world. And I think the takeaway, and I guess I better quit. By the way, there was a second time where he told Job to gird up his loins. But I think the takeaway is this: sometimes God's ways they're just beyond our comprehension. And, I think one day we're going to stand in the presence of Christ. And as Paul says in Corinthians, we only know in part now. It's like we're looking at a foggy mirror and we can't quite see things. But when we see Christ, then we're going to know fully, is what Paul says, even as we're fully known. And until that day, I think things are going to happen in our life where sometimes God's ways are just beyond our comprehension. Well, kind of the final little piece of Act 3, and we'll quit with this, is that Job repents. And in chapter 42, I know that you can do all things and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. I think he's communicating trust here. And he says, therefore, I've declared that which I didn't understand. Things too wonderful for me, which I didn't know. Let's see if I've got more. I've heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes see you. And he has this encounter with God. And really, it's not that he comes away with the answers, but he comes away trusting. And out of that, God then sort of rebukes his friends and asks Job to pray for them. And then in this particular case, God restores Job's fortunes and his family. By the way, this is the end statement of Job. Therefore, I retract and I repent in dust and ashes. And we're simply told the Lord restored the fortunes of Job when he prayed for his friends, and the Lord increased all that Job had twofold. Now, you know, it doesn't always happen like this. This is a happy ending, and we get to see this. For some of us, the happy ending doesn't come till Jesus comes. And so some people think it's a bad ending, but it's what happens here. But I want to just point out one really important thing. So it goes in, and it gives us all these numbers, okay? So the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning, and he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, 1,000 female daughters, and he had 7 sons and 3 daughters. Now, do you see anything inconsistent in that statement? Everything doubles but what? The kids. But what does that imply? It implies that a day is coming when he will have double, because his kids are on the other side. And one day he'll have both these kids, but he'll have his others back. I think there's a very subtle little implication in the statement that I think is powerful. And again, it's great when you have a happy ending. Sometimes, again, it doesn't always work out like that, but the truth or the message is the same. And then kind of the final lines of the story. After this, Job lived 140 years. He saw his sons and his grandsons 4 generations, and Job died an old man and full of days. And that brings us to our next stop, the book of Psalms, 150 chapters in 45 minutes, all right? All right, let's pray. Lord, we would like a much easier answer, I think, most of us. And, we recognize that we tend to process with a very limited amount of information and ability to understand the world. Certainly, your infinite wisdom and knowledge and understanding are beyond our capacity. You've shown us enough, you've told us enough, you have done enough to get us to a point where we know we can trust you. And certainly when we look at Jesus and the cross and what you've done for us there and the resurrection and Lord, all that you have done for humanity, we can trust you even through the tough times. And Lord, even when we go through tough times and we lose confidence and we lose faith, you understand that. You understand us and you love us, and you bring us around gradually and slowly, and we're just grateful for your patience with us. Thank you for this message. It's something that we need to ponder and know and hear, and we're simply grateful that you have chosen to make Job a part of your revelation to us. And we pray these things in your name, Christ. Amen.